Canada is a very special place. Canada's absolutely one of the worst. Canada's been very bad to us. Canada's very tough. You know, we're not treated well by Canada. Canada's very, very tough. You know, we love Canada. We think of the beautiful song and the ice hockey games. Oh, Canada, isn't it beautiful? But in the meantime, they knock the hell out of us. Canada's been tough on the military. Canada, very, very tough. Very, very tough. And they're very tough. And they're not at all nice, but we've made them nice. We've made them nice. Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years. People don't realize Canada is one of the toughest negotiators. Canada, who is very tough to negotiate. You know, we think of, oh, Canada. Oh, Canada's tough. They're tough. Canada has been very tough to deal with. Canada was very tough. Canada has been very tough on this country. Oh, Canada. We love to hear the song, right? But let me tell you, they are very tough, and they've taken advantage of our country for many, many years. Canada has treated us very, very unfairly. Canada was very tough to deal with, you know? Canada was tougher to deal with than China. Canada was very tough. Canada, they're very tough. I have a great relationship with Canada. They're very tough. With Canada, it's very tough. Canada was very tough on us. Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough. Canada's a special place, and they really are good at ice hockey.
Liberal Canadians can't stand Donald Trump. I was just waiting for this restaurant to open, and there was a Canadian couple. They started talking to me, and the guy's like, "Where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from California." And he was like, "Don't worry, don't just tell people you're Canadian. Don't tell them you're American." I was like, oh, "Okay," like, haha. And then he's like, I was like, "Yeah, I was just in New York." He's like, "We're boycotting the United States until Trump's out of office." And I'm like, you know, Trump's doing not a lot of great things, but like, it's still better than Canada. Like, Canada's a joke. Like Justin Trudeau, I mean, kind of laughing stock. And some of these liberal Canadians are pretty radical.
Donald Trump is officially the weakest president in American history, and I don't mean that in a physical sense, although he is weak as fuck. He is literally a hand puppet for Bibi Netanyahu. His hand is so far up Donald Trump's ass that he could stick his fingers out his mouth like that, right? So here's the problem. Netanyahu has intentionally sabotaged almost every single deal. I bet you didn't know when Obama put in the JCPOA, before it passed, Benjamin Netanyahu flew out to Washington, D.C. and addressed Congress without the White House's permission. Did you know that? Calling the deal disastrous, even though experts proved that it pushed Iran's nuclear program back by years. Benjamin Netanyahu called it disastrous. Why would he do that? Because he wants a war with Israel. And so Benjamin Netanyahu has literally puppet walked Donald Trump into a war because our quote-unquote deal maker who thinks he's a king doesn't know how to handle his own business. And so therefore he's letting Benjamin Netanyahu walk him into a war, first striking them last year and now creating an actual war and putting our troops, our children in harm's way, all for Israel. And if you don't believe that, how about the fact that we are in a memorandum of understanding, a 60-day ceasefire where the Strait of Hormuz is open, and what does Bibi Netanyahu do? He bombs Lebanon to violate the memorandum of understanding, closing the Strait of Hormuz all over again, because Iran doesn't, or Netanyahu doesn't want a deal. He wants a war. He wants Iran destroyed. I was in 5th Special Forces Group. I know what the cost of war is in bodies and in trauma. They're using our bodies. They're using our children. They're using American lives to service Netanyahu's desires. And Trump is the puppet master.
This is your way of celebrating America. The White House did it much differently with the UFC fight. What did you think about that?
It was a travesty. Yeah. What else can you say about it? It was embarrassing. I was embarrassed to be an American.
Who else feels exactly like Larry David did? Listen again.
Action that had been designed to unfold in sequence, not in parallel. Wall Street thought it was watching escalation. In reality, it was already inside the response. The problem with coordinated financial moves is not the size of the action, but the timing of recognition. Markets do not panic when something happens. They panic when they realize what has already been happening for some time without them noticing. By the time Wall Street had begun to understand that Canada's reaction was not isolated, the second layer of movement was already unfolding inside the system. In Washington, Trump's escalation had continued on the assumption that pressure creates predictable compliance. More tariffs, more restrictions, more public certainty in private negotiations. It was a familiar sequence in American trade doctrine: apply force, wait for adjustment, then define the terms of settlement. But this time, the adjustment never came in the expected direction. Instead of slowing, the financial distortion intensified, not in a single market, but across connected layers. Credit pricing between U.S. and Canadian institutions began to widen in ways that did not reflect fundamentals. Energy-linked derivatives showed asymmetric hedging pressure, and cross-border capital flows, usually stable even under political tension, began to reroute through alternative institutional channels. Nothing in public statements explained it. That was what made it dangerous for analysts. They were forced to interpret movement without narrative, and in markets, that is the fastest path to mispricing risk. Mark Carney's role in this phase was not visible in political framing. It was visible in institutional behavior. Because central banking logic does not operate like political messaging, it operates like pressure calibration. Small adjustments across large systems that, when aligned, create directional force without needing public declaration. And that is what Wall Street began to miss. It was still searching for a headline event, a tariff announcement, a legal filing, a formal retaliation. Something visible, something attributable, something that could be priced as a single shock. But what was happening was not a single shock. It was distributed execution. Inside Canada's financial architecture, coordination had reached a level where individual institutions were not acting.
Okay, Chad, I hate to break it to you, but the mask is off. If you still believe that the Canadian liberal democracy genuinely cares about human rights or international law, I need you to give yourself just a little pinch, listen up for a minute, and lock in. What Prime Minister Mark Carney just did regarding the US-Iran peace deal at the G7 summit is a masterclass in cynical realpolitik, showing how fast the government trashes its principles the second global oil and corporate profits are on the dang line. And this hypocrisy is completely betrayed by the timeline. Back on March 2nd, after the US and Israel launched unilateral strikes under the codename Epic Fury, Epstein's Fury, Carney admitted that the actions appeared, quote, inconsistent with international law. Neither Security Council authorization nor self-defense conditions were met, yet Canada merely expressed regret. I mean, I thank him for the tiniest violin, but let's fast forward to a CNN interview. Carney now flatly states that the devastating conflict was worth it, just because it forced a preliminary nuclear framework. When pressed if this unlawful action was even necessary for peace, Carney completely dodged the question. And this is exactly why NDP leader Abby Lewis calls Carney's posture completely incoherent. You can't accurately identify an illegal act of aggression in March, and then turn around in June to declare that the immense loss of civilian life was a reasonable fucking line item expense. And here's the part that got me the most. To justify this moral pivot, Carney falls back on Orientalist tropes, explicitly stating that Iran needs to learn to be civilized. It's a patronizing narrative, like a teacher breaking an unruly child. The modern-day white man's burden, if you will. He's not treating them like a sovereign political entity with complex histories and whole-ass, full human lives. He's talking about barbaric children needing the West to beat them into submission. It's deeply embedded imperialist rhetoric. But beneath this rhetoric, the plumbing is completely economical. In typical neoliberal fashion, Carney's analyzing a humanitarian crisis like a global accountant, evaluating success by commercial metrics like mine clearance and oil transit over human rights. Sure, blocking the Strait of Hormuz threatened 20% of global oil and market stability. After all, that's why Carney signed the G7 statements and volunteered Canada to manage the financial architecture, overseeing the unfreezing of $300 billion over a 60-day window. But that doesn't make up for this blatant human rights hypocrisy. Dude, you're exposing UN values as a total show and farce. As journalist Justin Ling detailed in the Toronto Star, Carney's eroding legal precedents to placate a volatile Trump administration, with CUSMA negotiations looming and heavy pressure over electric vehicle tariffs. The Liberal government is making a cynical calculation. Praise Trump, manage the asset plumbing, and sacrifice international law to protect corporate market access. In other words, the Liberals will completely abandon every progressive value they pretend to hold. The absolute second domestic corporate profits and access to the American empire are even threatened.
Canada this, Canada that. US this, Canada that. What do you think of today's conversation? But Canadians saying they won't bow to MAGA reflects a desire to maintain their own political identity rather than being drawn into US culture wars. At the same time, many Americans criticizing Trump show that MAGA does not represent all of the United States. The debate highlights that both countries have diverse political views, and neither should be reduced to a single movement or a leader. What do you think about today's video? Keep the conversation going in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. I am truly yours, Rose.